before there ever was a YouTube channel called à-bas-le-ciel, I had a blog that was called Vegan Mind Tricks. Now, some people have insinuated that there's something improper or menacing about that moniker, about Vegan Mind Tricks. I think it's a cute name. But one of the things I did on that channel on Vegan Mind Tricks, and it's something I have done here on YouTube a couple of times, not all the time, but from time to time, I did talk through with people the kind of strategy and tactics of the real-life, face-to-face debates that they had involving veganism. Now, real-life debates, the reason why I put emphasis on that is we're not talking about an academic debate. Very often you're talking about a confrontation with a coworker, like maybe somebody at the cafeteria at work who denigrates you or insults you or picks a fight with you about veganism. Maybe it's a long-standing debate or conflict you have with your own parents, with your own boyfriend, with your own girlfriend. Maybe you're negotiating relationships in your life that have really changed. Maybe you just have a friend. Maybe there's no love involved. Let's say you just have an old friend, and for decades you've been going to baseball games together. And it used to be that baseball and beer and hot dogs were part of your friendship. And then things change because you become vegan. And now maybe all those things are in question, the baseball and the beer, but most obviously the hot dogs are out the picture. So a lot of people have friction in their lives. They have confrontations, sometimes very intimate, sometimes in the workplace, etc., etc. But so those questions of strategy and tactics, they really change depending on the situation. And it's not a matter of just standing up and in a shrill voice testifying or protesting or preaching veganism. A lot of the time there's a very nuanced push and pull where really what you're trying to accomplish is to get other people to respect you and to hopefully keep that relationship going long term in a way that's really workable and has some level of mutual respect where they respect your reasons for being a vegan, even if they're never going to become vegan themselves. Because let's face it, folks, 99.9% of the people in our lives are never going to become vegan, and we got to live with that day after day, no matter how good a job we do giving voice to our convictions for the reasons for why we care, for the reasons why this is so important for us. So in this video, I'm kind of going back to my old steeds because I want to talk about one little logical trap that people tend to lay for you. And this one is interesting because I see it ongoing within the vegan movement, as well as outsiders criticizing veganism. You know, it's such a funny thing when philosophically people will say to you, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with eating meat. Or a vegetarian may argue there's nothing inherently wrong with eating milk or eating eggs. Now, I'm not going to start off by saying that arguments of this kind are always completely idiotic. There's a range. Going back to ancient Greek philosophy in Europe, you did actually have debates about whether or not eating basically roadkill. They did not have roadkill in ancient Greece, but the equivalent of roadkill, an animal that had died anyway, or a human being that had died anyway. We have records of philosophical debates about cannibalism to say, well, if a person has died of old age or an animal has died of old age, what are the ethical questions surrounding eating that animal? I.e., nobody hunted it, nobody killed it, it wasn't raised on a farm, you just have this corpse lying there anyway. Now, the progress of modern science has made that kind of debate all but obsolete. There's almost no question today about anyone eating that. Among other things, cannibalism, we now know is not good for your health, so cannibalism has dropped off the map. But I just put that in as a caveat. It's possible that someone is raising those issues for reasons that are not shallow, that are not insincere, that are not catty, that they actually want to object to or debate aspects of vegan ethics from that perspective of thinking about roadkill, of thinking about animals that have died of old age. Anyway, obviously, nobody is going to a baseball game and buying a hot dog that's made out of roadkill. Nobody's going to a baseball game and buying a non-vegan, hamburger made entirely out of wild animals that were never raised on a farm, that frolicked freely in the wild until they eventually died of disease or old age or predation by another animal, to then have a human being chop up their corpse and turn it into hamburger. I don't hear anyone even talking about that in the future. But you might have noticed in my recent discussion of this book, Zoopolis, that book, supposedly a pro-animal rights book, supposedly having an intellectual approach to veganism, animal rights, ecology, it was using this type of logical reasoning to claim there is nothing inherently wrong with eating meat. There's nothing inherently or intrinsically wrong with eating eggs or with eating milk. Now, when I talk about that face-to-face, so again, not an academic context, maybe it's someone who knows me, someone who loves me, someone who's my friend or girlfriend or whatever it is, I think it's really the tactic I use is to, in a not insulting way, trying to keep it respectful and polite, to ask them, how much different would that sentence be if I took the word intrinsically out of it? Now, not all of you know this. The opposite of extrinsically is extrinsically. What you're really saying, without even having to use that vocabulary, is what really is your claim. If there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it, then you must be insinuating that there's something extrinsically wrong with it. Or if we don't know that word, that you're saying non-intrinsically, there's something else wrong with it. There's something extraneous that's wrong with it. So let's focus on that. Let's actually spell out clearly what that is. So if and when people do say that to me, they say there's nothing intrinsically wrong with eating meat, there's nothing inherently wrong with eating meat, I ask them, okay, so how much different would how much difference is there between what you've just said and if I delete that fancy word and we just say there's nothing wrong with eating meat, or there's nothing wrong with drinking milk? And what I'm doing is inviting them to really spell out what their position is. Now, they may come back and say they think there's nothing wrong with it as long as the animal lived a happy life. They may say there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's free range. They may then come back with explaining whatever their position is. And, that puts you, I think, in the position to, instead of addressing a completely ridiculous claim, to simply state what your own feelings are on the matter. Why it is that this matters to you so much, to talk about your own values, to talk about who you are, talk about why you've chosen a moral path in life that doesn't include that kind of compromise. I can imagine situations in which I would compromise. You're on a desert island, etc. I'm not living on a desert island right now, right? I do see a kind of weird parallel to this, these claims that there's nothing intrinsically wrong with, there's nothing inherently wrong with. When people try to... what's interesting about that, I don't want to use too much philosophical jargon here. In using language like intrinsically and inherently, they're engaging in what's called essentialism. So what this entails is a worldview in which some acts are intrinsically evil, are inherently wrong, and others are not. So probably anyone you meet in real life doesn't actually believe this, but some people would believe that it is intrinsically wrong to kill a human being because a human being has an intrinsic soul. This is a very medieval way of seeing the world. I don't know if I've ever encountered someone to believe this. Whereas to kill an animal is only extrinsically wrong because the animal does not have a soul. So, as they say, reality, if you actually ask someone what they mean, if you move past this veneer of philosophical language, I think you're almost never going to encounter that being their reason or their rationale. Probably they're going to fall back on an animal welfarist position, a happy meat position, of saying as long as the animal lives a good life, then eating its corpse is a-okay. This kind of approach. I think it's also interesting that people take a sort of strange essentializing position when they approach these problems by telling you that blank is a construct. So this is short for blank is a social construct. If you hang around university-educated people, you've probably heard this a lot in the last 10 years. So they say things like gender is a social construct, difference between wealth and poverty is a social construct. Any concept that they want to heap scorn on, they will just fill in the blank and is a social construct, or just is a construct for short. Now again, this actually falls back on the same essentialist manner of thinking. Their claim implicitly is some things, some ideas are constructs, are social constructs, and others are not. Others have essential or intrinsic value. Now, I've had to address this in the last 10 years. I guess 10 years this has been popular from a variety of different perspectives. But fundamentally, my response to this is, so what? And I'm going to come back to it. I think this is also, so what is actually, for a lot of arguments, so what is a really good way to respond, because the initial argument is so weak that you don't need anything a lot fancier than that. If the difference between Cambodia and Vietnam is a social construct, so what? It's true, there's nothing essential. There's nothing intrinsic. You can walk through the swamp. You can walk along the stretch of land where the invisible line is that separates Vietnam from Cambodia. There's nothing intrinsic. There's nothing inherent in that land that makes one side Vietnam and one side Cambodia. Guess what? millions of people are willing to lay down their lives to fight to the death over the location of that line, over the difference between Vietnam and Cambodia. And if you look back at the last 1,000 years, they have a very long history of contesting where one country stops and the other country starts, of the competition between empires. And also for Cambodia, mostly this has just been a struggle to survive, to not be overwhelmed by Vietnam for the last several centuries. They've been largely on the losing side of those battles. So what are you actually saying? What is the power? What is the effect of your claim if you tell me there's no inherent or intrinsic difference between Cambodia and Vietnam? Really, so what? Now, again, actually vegans use this type of reasoning sometimes when we try to argue there is no inherent or intrinsic difference between a cow and a pig, or between a pig and a dog. We also do engage in this line of argument, and it's not always completely meaningless. But, if your claim is there's nothing intrinsically wrong with eating meat, so what? And watch where I go with this, because I don't use this in an aggressive or insulting way. Okay, if there's nothing intrinsically wrong with eating chicken eggs, there's only something extrinsically wrong, because chicken eggs have no soul. Maybe that's really what they believe, or maybe it's more of this animal welfarist position, that there's nothing intrinsically wrong if the chicken led a happy life. This kind of thing. Okay, if your claim is there's nothing intrinsically wrong with chicken eggs, it's only extrinsic, what about doing the best you can do? Is compromising with the industrial manufacture of chicken eggs, or even the organic free-range manufactured chicken eggs, is that the best I can do? I'm not really interested in the question of whether or not an egg has a soul. I'm not really interested in the question between the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic evil. What is the difference between eating a human being's eggs and eating a chicken's eggs, or murdering a human being and murdering a cow? I'm actually interested in doing the best I can. So if I believe I can do the best I can, not by just eating less meat, but by eating zero, that's one example of doing the best I can. If I think I can do less harm, I can be a better person, I can help make the world a better place, not just by eating organic free-range eggs, but by eating absolutely no eggs, why wouldn't I do the best that I can? Right? And so now the other side is in the position of having to argue, why is it, whether it's on the basis of this kind of fancy philosophical language or otherwise, why are they putting forward an argument that is basically an argument against doing the best you can? That's my advice.